Hey everyone, my name is Mr. Adams and welcome to my virtual classroom. Today we're going to be talking about something called news values. You may recall that I had you guys do an assignment last class where I asked you to think about what news stories are valuable to you. And I had a bunch of different answers and responses, and I loved all their responses. I did go ahead and grade that assignment, so if you haven't done it already, please be sure to go back into Canvas and make sure that you complete that assignment. Even if it's a late grade, it's better to have some points than no points, my friend. So be sure to do that, alrighty? So when it comes to news values, I want to break down that phrase there, news values, okay? What does that word mean? What do you think that word means? Values. Value is a word that is used to describe things that are something that is important to us or has some kind of worth to us. When someone says you have value, you have worth, you are important, you are able to provide something that we as a society need. Now, have you ever asked yourself the question, why do certain things pop up on the news while other things don't? And that is because not every single thing that happens in the world is newsworthy. There are some things that we just don't need to know about. For example, we may not hear on the news if you got into a car accident, right? Or if there was a car accident down the street, we wouldn't necessarily hear about it on the news. But if someone happened to pass away as a result from that car accident, then we would hear it on the news because the incident now has news value to it. Okay, so there are 8 different categories of newsworthiness, of 8 different news values, and that's what we're going to be going over today. My friends, this PowerPoint is available on Canvas as well. So if you want to find it, be sure to just go to Canvas, click on modules, and you'll see the section that says the 8 news values. This PowerPoint, along with a brief description of the lesson, along with the outline of the PowerPoint, is available there for you to read. I also send out this a PowerPoint in a PDF format via the Remind app. Now, I know some people said that the message in the Remind app wasn't working. Some people were able to make it work, which is fine. But if you do not have access to it in the Remind app, just be sure to go to Canvas and you can pull the PowerPoint presentation that way. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Okay, my friends, so let's get going. The 8 news values. So what makes something newsworthy? What makes something worthy of being on our news? Why do we care to see certain things on our news, whether it be local news or national news? All right, let's get into it. What determines what is on the news or not? What value does anything that happens in the world have that would make it newsworthy? Okay, these are the questions we should be asking ourselves. And we're going to be answering them right now by going over the news values. Okay. The first news value we're going to talk about today is something called impact. When you think of impact, what do you think of? Maybe something that affects a lot of people. How intense a situation may have been, right? Impact is a news value that refers to how many people were affected and how seriously were they affected. So when something happens in the world that affects a lot of people, it becomes newsworthy because we now are interested in knowing what happened that affected so many people. So you're going to have an assignment next class where I'm going to ask you guys to go out and find a news story that's a great example of impact. And you're going to be looking for news stories that deal with situations where a lot of people were affected by whatever happened. For example, natural disasters are a great example of news stories that have an impact news value. We care about when a force of nature causes a lot of damage or issues for people. Okay? If maybe you know the middle picture here on the PowerPoint, this was the explosion in Beirut, Lebanon. A couple of weeks ago, there was a massive explosion of a warehouse that it was all over the news. A huge, massive explosion that basically blew off a part of this little peninsula in Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon, and it affected a lot of people. And it was just an incredible sight to see. That explosion was terrifying. But that story has an impact news value to it because it's a story that affects a lot of people. You can see in this photo alone, this middle photo here, that after the explosion, it looked like apocalyptic. I can't say that word. It looked like a nuclear bomb had dropped. And if you happen to have seen the video, it kind of looked like a nuclear bomb exploded, right? And of course, COVID-19. The whole world is affected and continues to be affected by the coronavirus, all right? So any story happening with COVID-19, okay, has an impact news value because it affects a lot of people. So again, impact refers to any news story that involves or affects a lot of people. Okay. Now, impact doesn't necessarily have to be as intense as these three examples. Okay. We have maybe passage of legislation on a state or national level, right? When new policies and laws are enacted, it affects everybody because as law-abiding citizens, we must abide by the law if we do not want to end up in jail or something worse. Okay, so it's really important that we make sure that we know all the different laws that are happening. For example, you can now get a ticket for texting and driving because it does pose a threat and a danger to people on the road. If you're not paying attention to what you're doing, you because you're texting or Snapchatting or taking a selfie, whatever, you can get in serious trouble. So it's important to know that because nobody wants a ticket. So when a law is passed, it affects everybody because we have to abide by that law. An election. We have a huge election coming up. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump in this upcoming presidential election. That news story has an impact on everybody in the country. And some would argue the world, because America is one of the biggest, most dominant forces in the world. So who our president is matters, and it impacts a lot of people. Okay? So, and your assignment that's going to be given to you guys next class, I'm going to be asking you guys to find an example of a story that has an impact news value. Okay? Again, they're news stories that involve something that affects a lot of people. Okay, my friends? Next, weight. Weight. Okay? When we think of weight, we think of things that are heavy. Okay? When it comes to weight as a news value, okay, we aren't referring to physical weight. We're more referring to an emotional weight. When someone says they have a lot of weight on their shoulders right now, they feel very weighted at the moment, they usually referring to that they're kind of upset, they're sad. Okay? So weight refers to the depth of pain, how sad something is. Okay? We hear stories all the time about situations that are incredibly sad. Okay? And when something is really sad, piques public interest. People want to know about these sad situations, okay? Now, impact and weight are similar in a lot of different ways, but not the same, okay? Weight of a story includes how many and how seriously people were affected by any given news story, but also can be measured by depth of pain, shock, or how out of character or unexpected something might be. So impact refers to a news story that affects a lot of people. Weight refers to how sad something is. Okay, so something like a natural disaster that causes, like Hurricane Katrina that happened a couple years ago. Well, I guess not a couple years ago, like over a decade ago. Was incredibly affected a lot of people, and it was incredibly sad. So that particular story had two different news values to it: impact and weight. But news stories can have an impact news value to it without being sad, right? Maybe an example of maybe a law is passed that gives people the right to vote. That affects everybody, but isn't necessarily sad. So impact refers to a lot of people being affected by any given news story, and weight refers to how sad something is. Okay. Some examples: accidental death or injury, incredibly sad stories. Okay. We all know that earlier in this year, the first atrocity of 2020 was the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gigi, right? So that story is incredibly sad. All right. So because of how tragic and sad that story is, it makes huge headlines. Okay. Also, we see stories all the time, news stories all the time about dog owners who are caught on camera just abandoning their dogs on the side of the road, abandoning their pets on the side of the road. Those things make headlines and make the news because they are incredibly sad situations. All right, and maybe or maybe not, you may or may not know who this young girl is here on the right. Her name is JonBenét Ramsey. Okay, the story of her murder, and I think it was the 90s, shocked the world and how sad it was. Her remains were found in the basement of her parents' home, and the mystery still to this day goes unsolved. But JonBenét Ramsey's story was so sad, okay, that it shocked the world. It had a weight news value to it, okay? And a lot of us still know who she is today. When I mention the name JonBenét Ramsey every year, students are like, oh, that's who she is. Oh, wow. Okay? There's a lot of conspiracy theories about her death as well, but that's something totally different. Her story has a weight news value to it because of how sad it is, okay? So when I ask you guys to do your assignment next class, I'm going to say, hey, find me a news story that gives me a good example of something that is incredibly sad, a news story that is just incredibly sad. You're going to try to find those sad stories. Okay? All right, next. Timeliness. Okay? We can look at the word there. We see that the root word there is time. So when someone is timely, that refers to how recent something is. Okay? A news story or something that happens becomes newsworthy when it is a recent event. Okay? We care about things that are new, that are happening now. We don't care about old news. Okay? For example, we have these two pictures on the side of the screen. On the upper left-hand corner, we have that picture with Spider-Man. Maybe you know what this picture is from, but it's from the upcoming Spider-Man Miles Morales video game that's going to be released on the PlayStation 4. PlayStation 5. That hasn't come out yet. But we care about news stories involving the latest games because we want to know what's going on with them. We care about news stories that are about the